Okay, we just started taking a look at Genesis chapter 1, Genesis 1:1. We didn't get too far. There's a lot there. Now let's take a look at the same time, we'll go back and forth, about the evolution versus creation arguments and investigate them from a point of view of scientific credibility. Theory, fact, law, model, what is it, this debate? Look under the letter C for creationism versus evolution. Scroll on down. A lot of C's. We have a detailed index. We'll just go to the very top of the study. Introduction to this is necessary. Only two positions to choose from in this discussion: creationism or evolution. Which is the most feasible, probable? But only one is logical. It is easy to be an atheist when you don't stop and think seriously about where everything came from. Many scientists say that nature is all there is, and it came from the Big Bang Theory. But they mostly don't say where it came from. Some say it came from nothing. Others reject that, saying it came from prior events. But they don't say where they came from. So others say they came from an infinite, eternal series of prior events, or we don't know. And there are many other theories that fall in between. Well, these cosmogonies are not observable, so they are not real science. Worse, they are logically impossible. Nothing can't be or do anything, and infinite causal regress is a logical fallacy. So they are really just irrationally dressed up in a lab coat. Now, we observe that nature is a series of dependent material events. So every series event has a beginning, so we know nature began. So prior to that, nature did not exist, so it could not have begun itself. Thus, nature would never have come to exist unless some whatever exists. There is more to reality than nature, and so naturalism is false. Now, to solve regress, what does whatever logically and ultimately have to be? Wholly independent, beginningless, non-series, event, non-material, all-powerful, and agential, as an agent. As such, unlike everything else, there is nothing about whatever which could or needs to begin in order for it to exist. Therefore, whatever has necessarily eternally existed and thus could not have come from anywhere. So, our gods, polytheistic gods, aren't because they are codependent and have their own regress issues. Similarly, pantheistic gods aren't because they are tied to nature. But a supernatural monotheistic God is a perfect God for this. Suppressing this sound truth without an equally workable or better solution is often not the result of reason, but of metaphysical bigotry and or rebellion. Now, given that our 5 human senses and science can't perceive anything beyond nature, how can we know this supernatural God? Well, a few religions speak of such a God, but talk is cheap. Much like science can't show you how nature or life began, so too is any religion that can't show you God's supernatural power. Unlike them, Jesus can deliver. Only he has paid what we owe, rose from the dead, lives and proved it to millions of people for thousands of years by showing them some of the same kinds of supernatural wonders and miracles described in the Bible. You observing such things with your own eyes is far from proof, far from real, far from beautiful, and better than anything the peddlers of naturalism, atheism, pre-bangs, abiogenesis, macroevolution, and other religions, philosophies, drugs and alcohol, Hollywood, hedonism, and other sins, 36 and the devil can show you. Dr. Don R. Patton, who wrote a little videotape, or created one, Creation versus Evolution, What is creation science? When we study origins, we find that there are two competing ideas, creation and evolution. Philosophically, there are only two ideas, variations on those themes. Colin Patterson says, the British Museum of Natural History, this theory, evolution, has only one main competitor, creation theory, though there are different stories of how the Creator went about his work. Also, Niles Eldridge says, indeed, the only competing explanation for the order we all see in the biological world is the notion of special creation. And we have here, creation and evolution, between them, exhaust the possible explanations for the origin of living things. Organisms either appeared on Earth fully developed or they did not. If they did not, they must have developed from pre-existing species from some process of modifications. If they did appear in a full developed state, they must have been created by some omnipotent intelligence. So both ideas have religious implications. Patton says, but then we're told sometimes that in the science classroom, we can only have evolution because that's scientific, whereas creation is religious. But both of them have very serious and religious implications. Huxley says, in the evolutionary pattern of thought, there is no longer either need or room for the supernatural. The earth was not created, it evolved. So did all the animals and plants that inhabit it, including our human selves, mind and soul, as well as brain and body. And so did religion. Membership. In his membership brochure, he says, I use the word humanist to mean someone who believes that man is just as much a natural phenomenon as an animal or a plant, that his body, mind, and soul were not supernaturally created, but are products of evolution, and that he is not under the control or guidance of any supernatural being or beings, but has to rely on himself and his own powers. This is obviously a belief statement. It's not scientific. This has religious implications. Ernest Mayr. The publication in 1859 of The Origin of Species signified the end of an automatic acceptance of the God-given nature of human morality. Evolution does not give us a complete set of ethical norms, such as the Ten Commandments, yet an understanding of evolution gives us a worldview that can be served as a sound basis for the development of an ethical system. That's religion. So evolution is presented here as the basis for an ethical system. It's promoted by survival of the fittest, power makes right, the struggle for survival. So evolution does have religious implications. Now, to get to the heart of the matter, defining terms is critical in order to determine the truth about origins. Variation within species is not the same as evolution, and they get mixed up, thrown about, and tossed in a tossed salad bowl according to the convenience of the one doing the communicating. There is this theory which states that many living animals can be observed over the course of time to undergo changes so that the new species are formed. This can be called the special theory of evolution and can be demonstrated in certain cases by experiments. But Patton says he's talking about what we would call normally variation, horizontal variation within a single species or kind. Kirkut calls it special theory of evolution. And yes, that kind of variation can be demonstrated by experiments. Things that one would call horizontal variation are called new species. However, they're the same kind, not a new species, as that which was there in the beginning, but we just see variation. Parrot with a different color or kind of beak. Still a bird. On the other hand, there is a theory that all the living forms in the world have arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form. This theory can be called the general theory of evolution. Now, Patton says, now that's a different idea entirely. Unfortunately, we find in much of the argumentation, people will use the special theory in their arguments and then switch right in the middle of the argument to the general theory in their conclusions. The real issue is a change from one kind to another kind. For example, we would see that the amoeba changing to a shark, changing to a monkey, changing to a man. But that's not variation. That's change from one kind to another kind. Likewise, we see various types of monkeys and various types of people. That's predictable. When we study individuals of the same kind, in addition to the study of the theory of change from one kind to another kind, we also involve the idea of origin from a common source that is all coming from the same thing. You're mixing it up. So, we've got Encyclopedia Americana, years ago we had this, defining evolution, saying evolution comprises all the stages of the development of the universe, the cosmic, biological, human, or cultural. Life is a product of the evolution of inorganic nature, and man is a product of the evolution of life. We have not yet proved that scientifically. That's a lot of religious, philosophical ideas. So that is the picture. The issue is not simple variation. Unfortunately, much of the argumentation is simple variation, and it does not relate to the subject of whether we came from a common origin or whether there was a change from one kind to another kind, unless we assume that these small changes add up to a new kind, and we haven't shown that that's, in fact, scientific fact. And that's really what's done. And this forms the conclusion of a great many people, even though it's unscientific. One person says, I see evolution in the lab every day. The other says evolution is unobservable. One of them is talking about special evolution, and the other is talking about general. One of them says, I see all kinds of variations. The other says, but we don't see this change from one kind to a totally different kind. So science's definition of different species does not always reflect reality. The definition of a species is a population of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offsprings. In the wild, segments of a population may be separated by physical barriers or behavioral changes, which can cause varieties no longer able to interbreed. Taxonomists will then call the two separated populations different species, even though if circumstances change, they would still be able to interbreed. When and if circumstances change, naturally or artificially, the two separated species may begin to interbreed again. They're the same kind. While doing a literature review for her graduate thesis, a recent graduate of Institution of Creation Research, Wendy Billock, discovered many recorded hybridizations in captive primates. Her thesis was on the behavior and captivity of drills. This monkey. Drills belong to the same genus as the more colorful mandrills. Mandrill sphinx, the latter being much more popular in zoos. It is not too surprising that drill and mandrill hybrids have been born in captivity, considering their morphological and behavioral similarities. They have even been back-crossed successfully, which by definition would place them in the same species. Even more surprising is the number of hybridizations that have taken place outside of the genus Mandrillus. So, we have a conclusion here. You can't conclude there's a species change. Assuming that mandrills and drills can be placed in the same species, another literature search was done to find all the recorded hybridizations of primates with either this or that species connection. Within this family, wish I could pronounce that, 7 separate species from 3 different genera have hybridized directly with either the drill or the mandrill. Those 3 genera, these 3 here, have interbred with mandrillas, have also hybridized with another 4 genera. Although this list includes 19 separate species, including these, with 1 or more species within this family. So creationists have long suspected that species classifications were artificial, and that a higher ranking such as genus or family could be used to best represent the original created kinds. So we're having to define what is a species and what is not. We'll return here next time.